Masechet Nazir Daf Lamed He. We are continuing our discussion of Klal uprat uklal and ribuy and mi'ut, these very fundamental midot hashaturah nidreshet bahem, and this sugya is one of the main sources for understanding how these kilalim, how these methodological rules work. All right, we're bringing it in because of the context of what exactly is a Nazir prohibited to eat and drink when it comes to grape products. For example, what about leaves of a grapevine? And so we saw this is a machloket between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbanan. Rabbi Elazar thought that it includes all the edible parts of the plant, including the leaves, and he learns that from ribuy and mi'ut. On the other hand, Rabbanan felt that no, only the grapes themselves and anything that comes from the grapes. This includes the skins and the seeds and unripe grapes and vinegar. And they are learning all that from the methodology of kelal u'pirat u'kelal. In this case, actually, pirat u'kelal u'pirat. All right, so we quoted the Baraita that discusses it, and now we've been analyzing some of the sections. And so we're going to continue. We're going to have here a long quote from the Baraita that we already learned, and then some more discussion about it. So here we go. Amar Mod, mentioned in the Baraita, Ima ha-perat mefurash peri gamor afkol peri gamor. The way a perat uklal uprat works is that we look at the details that are mentioned and we say what is an essential aspect of them, and then we'll come to include and generalize all other things that share that essential aspect that are exemplified in those details. So in the line right before this in the Baraita, that gave the answer for Rabbanan. Rabbanan read it as, look at the details, they're all grapes and grape products. Therefore, all grapes and grape products are going to be prohibited to the Nazir, right? So not only the ones that are mentioned explicitly, like the grapes and the skin and vinegar, but anything that is part of or comes from the fruit of the grape, including unripe grapes. That doesn't say, the Pesukim do say raisins, but they don't say unripe grapes. So the kelal comes to include unripe grapes. Okay, that is the initial presentation of the Baraita, and that's also the final one. But in the middle, they say, wait a second, how do you know that you're generalizing that much? Maybe you should generalize less, right? Whenever you're looking for an essential value, well, what is that essential aspect of the details? So maybe it's not anything that comes from the grapes, and that would include even an unripe grape. Maybe not. So this is what was our counter argument. Maybe the detail is something that is that it's a complete grape, and so too has to be anything that's a complete, meaning ripe grape, and that would exclude an unripe grape, and Nazir would be permitted, right? How do you know that you should be more so expansive? Maybe you should be more limited in your definition. And so we answered that already in the Baraita. Amarta im ken mahiniach hakatuv mashmao shelo amaro anavim lachim vibeshim haketibe yain v'chomes haketibe ha'en alecha ladun kelashon rishon acharon ela kelashon rishon. He says, if so, then you have nothing else to add, right? You did the Torah, the pasuk did not leave you anything that it didn't say. It already mentioned in the details grapes and raisins. Those are already written. Wine and vinegar. Those are already written. So therefore, since all the examples are already written, the generalization is not going to add anything that is not in the details itself. Therefore, we're going to reject this interpretation of the klal prat uklal, and we're going to go back to the first one that says anything that derives from the grape, even, for example, unripe grapes. Okay. If so, since we're going to include any part of the grape, including the pits and the skins, why do I need the end of the pasuk, the perat at the end, that says from skins to pits, to pit? לומר לך, כל מקום שאתה מוצא פירת וכלל, אתה רשאי למשכו לדונו כעין הפירת, אלא נעשה כלל מוסף על הפירת, עד שיפרוט לך הכתוב. So this teaches us actually a general rule about how pirat uklal uprat work. Without this very example, we wouldn't know the rule, right? It's very nice, right? The Torah, by formulating it itself in this way, teaches us the rule, and once we know the rule, then we can go back and apply it elsewhere. And so this teaches us that anytime you have a perat ukelal, you cannot assume only the details because you have the generalization. Rather, ela nasa kelal musaf la perat. Rather, the generalization adds to what's in the detail. Right. So, if you have generally perat uklal, we go by the second phrase. So perat uklal would include everything except maybe one thing that's totally diametrically opposite. That's perat uklal. So if you have perat uklal only, then you would be very, very inclusive. But if you have another perat at the end, just like this example that has a lot of detailed examples at the beginning, but then it says anything that comes from the grape, and then it adds two more details. So the two more details tell you don't read it like a perat uklal, in which case it's very general. Instead, it's a klal uprat uklal. That's when you read it as the second perat is limiting it further and saying, here's a generalization, but it's tied down, right? It's limited on both sides. So therefore, you can only generalize something that is essentially similar to the details. Okay, good. So that's why we have it at, that's why we have many of the details at the beginning, and then the Chatzanim and Adzag at the end. All right, so that explains Rabbanan. However, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah dekamokim lahay mechatzanim v'adzag lomar she'eno chayav ad sheyochel shnei chatzanim v'zag perata minale. That's fine for Rabbanan, but what are you going to do for Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who in the Mishnah, he was of the opinion that this phrase, Chatzanim Adzag, teaches that it's actually a leniency, that a person is not, Nazir is not liable for lashes until he has two Chatzanim and one Zag, right? Whatever, seeds and two seeds and one skin, or the other way around, however you define it. So since he's using that phrase already for a different derasha, then he's not going to have a perat at the end. So it's not a perat uklal uprat anymore. What are you going to do about that? And the answer is, the two Rabbi Elazars can go together. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah in the Mishnah, and Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, that's the Stam Rabbi Elazar, who is in the Baraita. They can work together. Since Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua in the Braita, he didn't use perat uklal uperat. If you remember, he used mi'et v'riba, a different system. And that system only required two phrases, and in that system he included everything, including the leaves and the tendrils. The mi'ut just limited, not the branches themselves. And so Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who used Chatzanim Adzag, that last phrase, that works very well together with Rabbi Elazar, who doesn't need the last phrase for his derasha. Okay, so that all works out well. But if you don't want Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah to be only like Rabbi Elazar, you want to try to reconcile with Rabbanan, we can. V'ibetema k'Rabbanan. Tisakadate kedama Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah lichtebe rachamana lahay mecharsanim ad zag gabe perate lemay hilcheta ketabe batar kelal shemamina limidayne bichlal uferat. It all can work out, because if you think that this derivation of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, that you have to have two seeds and one skin, that's what we're learning from Chatzanim Adzag. Well, and if that's all you're learning, then you could have put that phrase together at the beginning with all the other details, right? So have all the details of the grapes and the vinegar and the raisins and Chatzanim Adzag. And so it could have been there. So why then did the Torah put this phrase Chatzanim Adzag after the kelal? Oh, his teacher teaches us that we should follow a kelal uprat, and it is in fact a perat ukelal uprat. So therefore we could use that phrase for double duty. One is that it's phraseology, that it's using a plural and a singular, so we learn you have to have two seeds and one skin. And that's one thing we learned from it. That's Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's derasha. And from its placement, that it wasn't put in the first half, but rather at the end. Why is it separated from all the other details? Oh, that shows it's a perat ukelal uperat. And so Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah can be reconciled with Rabbanan. Now, if you're going to ask about that, no, maybe the whole phrase is only coming to have a perat at the end. How do you know it's coming to teach you that you have to have two pits and a skin? Im ken nichtov o shene charsanim o shene zagim o charsan vezag lama hilchet hakatav rachamana mecharsanim v'azag shema mina lemidrash be kilad ufrat v'ganame lemidrash be ad sheyochal shene charsanim vezag. I'll answer you and say, if it was only giving further examples, and it wants to tell you that grape seeds and skins are not allowed, but it's not coming to teach you the number, well then it could have just said two chatzanim in plural and zagim in plural, or both in singular. And so why would the Torah have this unusual phrase of having one of the words in plural and one of them in singular? So we can learn two things from it. From the placement, we can use it to teach us about the perat uklal uperat, because you have these details that are pushed to the end, so that's a closing perat. And we can also learn from the one being singular, one being plural, that the derasha Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, that you have to have two charsanim and one zag. All right, good. So now we explained Rabbanan everybody can follow Rabbanan, including Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. But now we're going to ask about Rabbi Elazar. Dedaresh mi'ayat v'riba klalu peratu klalu prat minale. Rabbi Elazar, who here in this case, he used mi'ut and riboy. So how is Rabbi Elazar where is he going to derive the general rule of peratu klal uperat? It's an interesting question, because, as we mentioned yesterday, these two systems of derivation, one comes from the school of Rabbi Ishmael, and one comes from the school of Rabbi Akiva. Nevertheless, it doesn't mean that the two schools didn't intermingle, and sometimes, one used the derivations from the other school. And in fact, in the Midrashei Halacha from the school of Rabbi Akiva and from the school of Rabbi Ishmael, you can see them quoting and using both types of derashot. So therefore, Rabbi Elazar, as a student, surely he agreed also with the very idea of perat uklal uperat. So our question is, then where did he? What would be his exemplar of it? Because he can't use Nazir. So let's look for some others, and we're going to see two or three other ones that are good examples of perat uklal uperat. Also perat uklal uperat uklal. We're going to see examples of both. Amar Rabbi Abhu, nafkale mehaykera, v'chi yiten ish el re'eu hamor oshor ose perat. V'cho behema kelal, lishmor hazar uperat. Perat ukelal uperat. I atadan ela ke'en haperat. Okay, good. So we asked for an example of perat ukelal uperat, and here is one. If a person, for the pasuk from Shemot, gives to his friend to watch, or as a watchman, he gives him a chamor, or shor, or seh. So those are all details. And then it says, kol behema, any animal. So you see there's a redundancy here. Why not? Why just say any animal? Why do you have to give the details if you meant any animal? And if you meant only these three types, no other animal, right? Only this, a donkey, an ox, or a sheep, then why say all kol behema? So we see, we have to reconcile this. Now, then we follow up with lishmor, and the derasha is taking the word lishmor as a detail. Now, even though this is not a type of animal, we're reading it as has to be something that is watchable. Because if you take just the word behema, maybe it means any living being, right? Even a lion, a lizard, I don't know. So the word lishmor means only something that is watchable. It has to be something that is of value and is movable, and that is not going to eat you, right? Is something that you can watch. So this is a limiting word as well. So then we have perat ukelal uperat atadan la ke'en haperat. So here you go. We have a good example. It gave some examples of domesticated animals. Then it said any behema. And that any behema would include, right now we're assuming it means maybe any living thing. So that was lishmor, no, only things that are similar to chamor and shod, that are movable items, that are of value, and are easy to guard. So only if it's something like that would this law apply. The law that if it dies, then the watchman takes an oath and says, listen, I was not negligent. He can take an oath, and then he doesn't have to pay. Okay, so that's the Rabbi Abu's example. Rava Amar, nafkale mahaikera, ve'im min perat, hason kelal, kebasim ve'izim, hazar uparat, perat ukelal uprat, e'atadan ela ke'ain haperat. Rava says, here's a nice example of a parat uklal uparat. Let's look at the pasuk inside. We're talking about animals that can be used for an olah offering. Says v'im min. We're going to learn the word min. Min is always a limiting word, right? From a group, right? You're taking a limited sample from a larger group. So min is a parat here. Hason is the kilal. That's a general category of small animals, korbano, and then it lists different types: kebasim o min ha'izim, from sheep and goats. Right, so flock is inclusive of lots of different types of small animals, not cattle, not cows, and then it goes and lists sheep and goats. Okay, so let's see how this works. So we have min is perat, son is kelal, kebasim nizim is perat. We have perat ukelal uperat, and so we're going to understand that anything that is like the perat, which means that when it says son, we want to include more things. So it's not only kebasim ve'izim, but it's going to include anything that is similar to it. Okay, there's some different discussion about what we are including here. I think a simple and straightforward understanding is if you have lambs, a lamb refers to a 1-year-olds, and you might think not rams. And so that's why the generalization comes to say also rams that are 2 years old. Okay, so that's an example, and we can learn the different what animals are allowed to be brought as an olah offering. Amar le Rav Yehuda midiskarta le Rava velav min medaden kera min perat habema kelal bakar veson chazaru perat. Perat ukelal uperat atadan ela ke'ain haperat. So Rav Yehuda here says we can learn the very same thing, not from this pasuk, but from a few pasukim earlier that says Adam ki akirim mikem korban Hashem. Min, that's a limiting word. Habehema is an inclusive word. And then it says habakar minason are detailed examples. So here also you have a perat uklal uprat. Why do you have to go so far in the perek? You can learn it from this here, the second pasuk in the Chumash. And you can learn the same thing, that it means it's talking about these types of domesticated animals. Amar le min hai leka lemishma mina. Rava says, no, I don't like your derasha. Hatama va'amina habehema chaya bichlal behema, because yours has the word behema, and behema is a very general word, and I might think that it will include not only domesticated animals, but even hayot, undomesticated animals. And so now you have a very broad category, and at best, the limitations, the perat, will say, okay, fine, not all behemot, not all wild animals, right? Only some, right? And then a deer, you can bring a deer as a korban, you cannot, right? Deer is, even though it's kosher animal, you cannot bring it as a korban. And so if you use that pasuk, you're going to have to deal with the word behema, and behema is too inclusive. You're not going to be able to limit it sufficiently for what the halacha needs to be. You see from here, like, we kind of know what the halacha needs to get to. We're just trying to find the best pasuk to derive it from. But if Rav Yehuda defends his pasuk and says, wait, a chaya would not be included in the word behema. Because you have bakar and son, those are the detailed particulars, and we know this is how it works. You only take from the generality that which is essentially similar to the details, and just like the detailed examples are behemot, or only the details are only like bakar and son, only domesticated animals, I would know that we're not including wild animals, and so therefore my derasha is perfectly fine. All right. So those are a couple of examples of perat ukelal uperat. But now the Gemara, still not satisfied totally, asks further, hachi hu tetanya. And how do we know that it works this way? We're going to see now, number one, a more detailed example, and also this example is going to be the opposite, kelal uperat ukelal. So we want to learn both variations and see how they work. So here we go. V'natata hakesef b'chol asher taveh nafshecha kelal. Babakar basun bayan b'shechar perat. B'chol asher tishalecha nafshecha chazar v'kalal. We're talking about the redemption of Ma'aser Sheni. Maaser Sheni, a farmer has to take 1/10 of his produce and eat it in Jerusalem. He can eat it all himself. He can share it with friends, family, poor people. This is a lot of money, 10% of his entire yearly income that he's going to spend in one visit. Okay, very nice. So if he lives close by, he can bring the fruit itself. But if he lives far away, then it's going to be impossible to carry all that. Instead, he redeems the Maaser Sheni for money, the equivalent amount, and he takes the money, brings it to Jerusalem. When he comes to Yerushalayim with that money, then he has to buy food items. He can't buy a car. He can't buy an apartment, as nice as that is to do. It has to be something that's similar to the things that he sold in the first place. And so therefore the Torah says he should take the money and buy anything he wants. Kol asher taveh nafshecha. Now, if you had only that phrase, stop right there, then you say, well, it means he could buy anything he wants. Maybe it means he could buy a condo. So that's why it says the details. Oh no, bakar and so on, yayin and shachar, animals, wine, and other alcoholic beverages to celebrate with. Those are the details. Now, if you had just that, you'd say, okay, that's it. You can only buy one of those 4 things. How about fruits and vegetables? How about birds? So those details then are follow up with another kilal. Kol asher tishalecha nafshecha, anything that you want. That's another generalization. All right, so now we have here like pretty much a contradiction. It says everything. It says 4 things. Then it says everything. So which one is it? So here we apply klal upratu klal e'atadan ela ke'ayin perat. We look for the essential aspect of those details and we generalize from them. Ma perat meforash peri meperi v'gidulei karka af kol peri meperi v'gidulei karka. And so we see this is produce of produce, means something that and that grows from the ground. So certainly any fruits and vegetables, that's peri. And anything that comes from perot. This will include animals. Animals don't grow from the ground, but domesticated animals do eat the grass from the ground. And so they are also, therefore, something generated from the ground. Birds also are included in this. This would exclude fish, by the way, because fish does not grow from the ground, not water, not salt. All right, so this is how we know you can buy basically almost any food item, but you cannot buy a car in Jerusalem with Maaser Sheni money. And there you go, we have a beautiful example. And so even if you don't have the example for Nazir, look, you have this example and the ones before it for Perat Uklal Uprat, and this example is for Kalal Uprat Ukelal. Now, Mikidi Kalal Uprat Ukaken Perata Daininan, Kelala Batra Mai Ahane. Now we're going to ask about how all these rules work and what would be the subtle differences between them. Okay, so now that we know that you have kelal upratu kelal, so if we're going to analyze it, something that is similar to the prat. Wait a second, the last kelal, what do you need it for? In other words, if I had just kelal uprat, then we follow the second one, and we know the details. So what is the last kelal going to add to the usage of this rule? And the answer is ahanila tusfe kol dedamila. We're going to add anything that is similar to the pirat. In other words, if you have just kelal upirat, then you're only going to have the details of the pirat. When pretty much you're going to stick only to those details. The last kelal makes it into a rule that we learn anything that's essentially similar to the pirat when we will generalize from that. Now, same thing with the other phrase, vetu piratu klalu pirat. kena perat daininan, perata batra mayahane, ilav perata batra havamina nasa kilal musaf ala perat. Same thing with perat uklal uperat, that we will follow whatever is in a way similar to the perat. So if so, what is the last perat doing? Right? Why not just be suffice with perat ukilal? And then I would know, look, I have a generality. And the answer is, if not for the last perat, then I would say the generality is adding everything to the detail. So in other words, if I had only perat ukilal, I would say everything is included. And that's why you need the last parat to tone it down and say, hold on, not everything, only something that is essentially similar to the piratim. That's what you could generalize. So they work pretty much the same way. Is there any difference between them? So now that you told me that if I have two kilals and one parat, meaning klal uprat uklal, or if I have two piratim and one kilala, meaning parat uklal uprat, in either way, I'm going to derive anything that is essentially the same as the perat. If it shares those essential values, then we're going to use it in the generalization. So what's the difference between the perat uklal uprat and kelal uprat uklal? And the answer is there is a difference. Ika tilu tarten kelale uperata, ika perata dedamile afilu besad behadsad marbinan. If I have two kelalim, that's going to be a little bit more expansive. And in that case, even if there's something that has only one similar detail to the perat, I'm going to add it in, right? So if there's just, it only shares, like in the Venn diagram, there's only one thing that it shares, because there's two klalim, the two generalizations are going to generalize it more power of generalization. And so, yeah, we'll say that's similar enough. So that'll include more. Whereas tere perateu klala iika perata dedami mishene sedadim marbinan bechadsad la marbinan. Whereas if I have one kalal in the middle and sandwiched by two peratim, well, that's more limiting. And in that case, I'm only going to generalize something that has two similar aspects to the perat. It has to share two essential qualities, then I'll generalize it. But if it shares only one essential quality, then I will not. All right, good. That seems very important. Now, mikelal perat u kelal, mikedi perat uklal nasa kelal musaf ala perat vitrebe kol mile umiet v'riba name riba hakol vitrebe kol mile ma'ika ben mi'et v'riba lifrat uklal. And now a very important question. Since let's say I have only two terms, right? Perat uklal, you follow the second term, and this generalization adds on everything or almost everything to the detail. Right? We add on everything. Now, how about mi'ut v'riboy? That from Rabbi Akiva's school, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua used. That's also the same thing. Well, since it has a detail and then a generality, so we follow the generality adds all matters. Okay, not necessarily all matters. If something completely opposite, like the branch, that's not even edible, that is excluded. But otherwise, we're basically following the second term. So what's the difference between perat uklal and mi'ui and ribui? How would they be applied? How would the result be different? And the answer is, well, there is a little difference. Ika de'ilu perat uklal marbinan afilu alin velulabin umiet v'riba lulabin in alin la. And the answer is, if we had perat ukelal, then we would include even more. Even the leaves and the tendrils would be included in the prohibition, for example, of a Nazir. Whereas if you use mi'ut and ribui, then we would say, listen, the tendrils, yes, but the alin, that no, they're too different from the mi'ut. Okay, this last line is a bit difficult because it contradicts what we said yesterday, that according to the Rabbi Elazar, who uses mi'ut v'ribui, he actually included lulavin and alin. He only excluded the branches themselves. And so this does seem to contradict the one previously. Also, in general, it actually seems to be the other way around, that perat ukelal would be less inclusive than mi'ut and ribui. And so therefore some suggest to switch these around, although in the manuscripts that is not confirmed. Although the truth is, we only have two Ashkenazi manuscripts, so a very slender evidence for this, and so it is possible that it should be switched the other way around, and that would resolve those contradictions. Baruch Adonai leolam, amen ve'amen.